A cold February morning, a quiet stretch of road on the edge of Philadelphia. And on the side of that road, a cardboard box, the kind that might hold an appliance, or a crate of goods. What it actually held would haunt this city for the next 65 years. 65 years, over 400 tips, multiple forensic reconstructions, a community that never stopped looking, and a name that took until December 2022 to finally reach the public record. If you want more real, source-backed investigations like this, subscribe to Frond and turn on notifications. It's free, and it helps us keep making these deep dives. This is the story of a child found with no name, a city that refused to forget him, and the DNA science that finally gave him 165 years later. Philadelphia, February 1957. The city was cold, gray, and still carrying the weight of post-war America. Row houses, corner stores, and neighborhoods where everybody's business was everybody else's. Except for one child nobody seemed to know. On February 25th, a man checking traps along Susquehanna Road in the Fox Chase section of the city noticed something off the side of the road. A large cardboard box, a bassinet box, sitting in the overgrowth. He didn't stop that day. He noted the box and moved on, but it stayed with him. When he returned the following day and it was still there, he looked closer and immediately went to alert police. Police arrived at Susquehanna Road that same morning. What they found inside the box was a child, a boy, between roughly 4 and 6 years old, wrapped in a plaid flannel blanket. The child had been recently bathed. His hair had been freshly cut. His fingernails were trimmed. Someone had cared for him immediately before his death, which made what happened to him all the more incomprehensible. The box itself was a JCPenney bassinet box. Investigators traced it to a store in the area, but hundreds had been sold. The box was a clue that opened dozens of doors and closed none of them. The plaid flannel blanket was traced to a mill, but like the box, it had been sold widely enough that it led nowhere definitive. Every piece of physical evidence was real but inconclusive. The medical examiner determined the child had been dead between 1 and 2 weeks before being found. Cause of death was ruled a homicide, blunt force trauma to the head, though investigators were careful to note this was their interpretation of limited evidence. In the days that followed, police checked every missing child report filed in the region. Nothing matched. No one, anywhere, had reported this particular child missing. For a child to go unreported as missing, investigators concluded he likely wasn't part of any system that would track him. No school records, no doctor visits, no daycare. He had been kept out of sight. Philadelphia newspapers ran the story. The tips came in immediately, dozens, then hundreds. Each one required follow-up. Each one led investigators into homes, hospitals, and records offices across the city and beyond. Police distributed flyers across Philadelphia with a forensic sketch of the boy. His face appeared in shop windows, on telephone poles, and in the hands of volunteers who canvassed every neighborhood they could reach. In the weeks following the discovery, Philadelphia police pursued every available lead. Despite an extraordinary public response, the child's identity remained completely unknown. With no name to bury him under, the city gave him a temporary grave at Ivy Hill Cemetery. His headstone read simply, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." For many investigators who worked the case, it was never just a file. Remington Bristow, an employee of the medical examiner's office, spent 36 years of his own time and money following leads, even after his retirement. Bristow became convinced the child came from a foster home he had located in Fox Chase, a property whose doll resembled the forensic sketch, he said. He pursued that lead until the day he died in 1993. It was never confirmed. Years turned into decades. The case file grew thicker, but the name inside it stayed blank. New detectives inherited it from old ones, each one briefed on everything their predecessors had tried and failed to confirm. He became known as America's unknown child, a name that was not a name at all, but a status, a placeholder for a question no one had been able to answer. In the 1990s, the Vidocq Society, a Philadelphia-based group of retired investigators and forensic professionals who volunteer to review cold cases, formally took on the boy in the box as one of its cases. In 2002, a woman contacted investigators with a story that shook the case open again. She claimed her mother had purchased a boy from his birth parents, kept him in their home, and that the family was responsible for his death. Her account contained specific, compelling details, but investigators were unable to corroborate crucial elements of it. and the woman herself, known publicly only as M, could not be fully verified. The lead was filed but not confirmed. As forensic technology advanced into the early 2000s, investigators exhumed the child's remains and extracted a DNA profile. For the first time in 40 years, there was something science could actually work with. The science that would eventually name him didn't exist yet in the early 2000s. What investigators had built was a foundation, a DNA profile ready and waiting for the moment the right technology caught up to it. In 1998, the city gave him a proper reburial at Ivy Hill Cemetery, this time with a dedicated headstone purchased by a detective on the case using his own money. By the early 2000s, the internet had given the case a second life. True crime forums, dedicated websites, and volunteer researchers began pooling everything publicly known, picking up where official investigations had stalled. As technology improved, new forensic artists created updated facial reconstructions. First drawings, then digital models, then three-dimensional busts, each one circulated again through the media, hoping someone would finally recognize a face. In 2019, Philadelphia police formally partnered with Othram, a private DNA genealogy laboratory in Texas, to apply the same investigative genetic genealogy techniques that had recently been used to identify the Golden State Killer. Investigative genetic genealogy works by uploading an unknown person's DNA to public genealogy databases and searching for partial matches, distant cousins, aunts, uncles, then building family trees backward until a candidate emerges. The child's DNA profile, extracted years earlier and refined over time, was uploaded to the GEDmatch public genealogy database. Then the researchers began building trees. The database returned partial matches, not close relatives but distant ones. Second and third cousins with overlapping DNA who had submitted their own profiles for personal ancestry research. Not knowing their data would one day help name a murdered child. Researchers began the painstaking work of building family trees from each partial match, tracing branches backward through generations, looking for a point where multiple trees converged on a single household. Over months of work, multiple family trees began pointing toward the same general region, the same pool of surnames, the same rough geography, the same generation. The noose, as investigators put it, was tightening. The DNA genealogy investigation, led by Othram Laboratory and Philadelphia police detectives, ran from 2019 through 2022, 3 years of tree building that culminated in a single name. After 3 years of genealogical work, researchers identified a family with the surname Zarelli as the most probable source. Birth records, census data, and death records were cross-referenced until a candidate emerged. Genealogists searched birth and death records from the 1950s looking for a boy in the right age range, born roughly between 1951 and 1953, within the Zarelli family and connected households. What investigators found was a boy born to the Zarelli family in the early 1950s. A boy for whom a birth record existed, but for whom no matching death certificate had ever been filed. A boy who, by the official record, had simply disappeared. Armed with the genealogical data, detectives took a name to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office and compared it against everything on file. Age, height, hair color, the physical details cataloged 65 years earlier. The DNA from the child's remains was compared against a sample obtained from a known Zarelli family member. It matched. After 65 years, the science was unambiguous. For weeks after the confirmation, police prepared to make the announcement public, a careful process involving victim advocates, family liaison officers, and prosecutors reviewing every detail before a name could be spoken publicly. On December 8, 2022, Philadelphia police held a press conference. After 65 years, they were ready to speak a name that no one had spoken for him since the 1950s. Philadelphia police announced the child's name as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13, 1953. He was 4 years old when he died. He had been unknown for 65 years. Philadelphia reacted with a mixture of relief and grief. Relief that a name had finally been given, and grief at everything the name confirmed. That a child had lived, had been cared for and then killed, and that no one had ever looked for him. Detectives who had spent years on the case, some of them retired, heard the news the same day the public did. Several spoke publicly about what it meant to finally have a name to give a child who had gone so long without one. The online true crime communities that had followed the case for years erupted. Threads that had been active for over a decade went quiet in a different way, Not because they ran out of questions, but because one of the biggest had been answered. Naming him Joseph Augustus Zarelli was a profound step, but it wasn't the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of a new question. Now that investigators knew who he was, they had to ask who killed him and why was he never reported missing. Philadelphia police indicated that both of Joseph's biological parents are believed to have died decades ago, which means the person or persons most likely responsible for his death are gone, beyond the reach of any prosecution. Despite the identification, the homicide investigation remains officially open. Police have confirmed they are working to establish a complete picture of Joseph's short life and how it ended. In the months following the announcement, plans were made to update his grave marker at Ivy Hill Cemetery, to add his name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, to a stone that had carried only a description for over 60 years. There is one detail that means something to people who have followed this case for decades. Remington Bristow, the investigator who spent 36 personal years searching for the boy's name, is buried in the same cemetery, just a short walk from Joseph's grave. Investigators and DNA scientists have called the Joseph Zarelli case a landmark for investigative genetic genealogy, proof that even the most dormant cold case can be cracked if the science keeps moving forward. Investigators and genealogists have estimated that investigative genetic genealogy could eventually help identify victims and suspects in hundreds, possibly thousands, of cold cases currently sitting unsolved in evidence rooms across the country. Investigators and advocates who worked the case have raised a hard question. If this child was kept off every record, hidden from every system, and never reported missing, that was not an accident. That was a choice made by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Genealogists working the case have noted that siblings or other close relatives of Joseph Zarelli may still be alive today, and may not even know they had a brother or what happened to him. With the identification confirmed, the murder of Joseph Augustus Zarelli became not only Philadelphia's oldest open homicide, but also one of the oldest actively investigated child homicides in American history. Police have appealed publicly to anyone with knowledge of the Zarelli family in the 1950s, neighbors, family friends, distant relatives, asking them to come forward, not to prosecute, but to complete the picture of a child's short life. Since the Zarelli case, Othram has applied the same investigative genetic genealogy methods to dozens of other unidentified victims across the country, many of them also children, also discarded, also given only a description where a name should have been. Investigators believe Joseph was born in January 1953. That means he lived for roughly 4 years in which the evidence suggests he was isolated from nearly every institution that might have recorded his existence. Perhaps the strangest detail, the one that has never fully left investigators, is that he was bathed and groomed before he was placed in that box. Someone took care of him, right up until they didn't. With the likely perpetrators deceased, traditional criminal justice isn't possible. What remains is the historical record, a name, a date of birth, and the public acknowledgement that this child existed, mattered, and deserved better. Today, at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia, Joseph Augustus Zarelli has a grave. He has a date of birth and a name, and a record that says he was here. It took 65 years. But it happened. A name is a small thing in the end. It takes up almost no space. But for 65 years, this child didn't have one in any public record. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, 4 years old, Philadelphia, 1957. Philadelphia police have said the investigation into who killed Joseph and who made the decision to hide his existence continues. They are asking anyone with knowledge of the Zarelli family in the 1950s to contact the Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit directly. Philadelphia's oldest open homicide now has a name. The child who was found on the side of a road in February 1957 has been identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. The question of who killed him remains unanswered. Somewhere along Susquehanna Road, on a cold February morning in 1957, a man checking traps found a cardboard box. He didn't know what he had found would take 65 years to understand. But because he looked, because he went back, a child finally has a name. Across America tonight, there are thousands of unidentified human remains stored in evidence facilities, waiting for the same technology that named Joseph to reach them. His case proved that wait can end. The case has also prompted renewed conversation about public genealogy databases. Every profile that a private citizen submits for personal ancestry research becomes, potentially, another data point that could one day name a victim or identify a suspect. To support the ongoing investigation, investigators conducted additional forensic work, recovering further material for analysis in the hope that newer laboratory techniques might yield details the original examinations could not. 65 years is an almost incomprehensible length of time for a question to go unanswered. Entire generations were born, lived, and died without knowing this child's name. The people who buried him in 1957 are gone. The people who identified him in 2022 grew up without knowing he existed. Remington Bristow spent 36 years of his personal life searching for a name he never found. He died in 1993, 9 years before investigators obtained DNA, and nearly 30 years before the name was announced. He spent more than a third of his life on a case that outlived him. He deserved a birth certificate with a name on it, a doctor who knew his face, a teacher who called his name at the start of the day. He deserved to be looked for. He deserved to be found while it still mattered. There is no box on Susquehanna Road anymore. The hedgerow has long since been cleared. The city has changed around that stretch of road completely. But the question it raised on a cold February morning in 1957 is, in some form, still being answered. On December 8, 2022, a name that had not been spoken publicly in over 65 years was finally said aloud at a press conference in Philadelphia. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. It took less than 3 seconds to say. It took the better part of a century to earn. A child's silence forced on him, maintained for decades, protected someone. We don't know who. We may never know exactly why. But the silence is broken now, and his name is in the record, and that cannot be undone. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13, 1953, died February 1957. Named December 8, 2022. Philadelphia's oldest open homicide, still being investigated. Sources for this investigation are in the description, from official Philadelphia police statements and the Othram genealogy report summary to 65 years of contemporaneous local and national news coverage. Everything you saw is drawn from the public record. If this investigation kept you watching, hit the like button, subscribe to Frond, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you in the next one.